Welcome to the Awe and Wonder podcast. This is series 6, where we're interviewing leaders and changemakers in the field of AT and AAC. For a while now, Brenda and I felt like it's so important to be able to hear from people in our field who are doing the work, who have done the work, and they're willing to share with others what they've learned to help the field grow. So today, we're really excited to have Gail Van Tatenhove on our podcast joining us. She doesn't really need much introduction, but I will say Gail's an SLP who's been working with kids who use AAC for over 47 years. And if you've been lucky enough to see Gail present in person, you'll know that she has a wealth of information and knowledge on AAC in general, and especially about implementation of MinSpeak, and so kids who use the Unity language system. And there's no doubt you've seen her resources around because they are amazing. Gail, welcome. And we hear that you've been called the Queen of MinSpeak.
I have indeed been called the MinSpeak. And actually in my career, as I've been on the road teaching about MinSpeak, I have at several times been presented at a workshop with some sort of symbol that represents my leadership in the field of MinSpeak and I'm going to put on one of them today. I'll take it off, but this is my favorite symbol that I have been given. And I can do the Queen Elizabeth wave. This is my favorite crown.
For those of you who are listening, yes, she's wearing a very beautiful queenly crown.
Tiara, yeah.
Yes,
it's a lovely little tiara.
What else have you been presented? That's such a cute.
Oh, I've been presented with a sash.
A
sash and tiaras or crowns are kind of the standard thing. So, and it's always done with love and with respect, and knowing that I can take a good ribbing as well as anybody else. So.
Well,
I'm
it's
okay
not
with it.
Standard because we've been speaking, Gail, and nobody's ever given us a crown, so it's not standard.
Well, there's a challenge out there now for you all.
Yes, there is. Okay, challenge accepted. You will be the first to know if we ever receive a crown.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us, Gail. We're really, really honored to have you on.
So we would like to start kind of in the beginning with just everyone's why. Like, is there a particular student in your career who inspired you in your career? And I know that everyone says there's been many, right? And there's times when you meet a kid and you pivot a little bit, like they change the trajectory. But way back in the beginning, right? Who comes to mind that kind of keeps you thinking?
You're kind of asking about my origin story here and my inspiration, of course. And I'm going to take a little different bent than some of your other speakers, because I could relate to some of the folks that inspired me early on, but I have to go back further as I reflect on that question, because I can trace my inspiration for being a speech language pathologist all the way back to high school. And I actually grew up around people with disabilities. My father had a business. It's now run by my brother and his son. And my father employed people with disabilities within his business. And I was often the person assigned to work alongside that person, to kind of keep an eye on them, explain stuff to them, help them through things. Now, these weren't individuals in wheelchairs who were using AAC systems, but they most definitely were people with cognitive disabilities, with learning challenges, with definitely communication challenges, on the autism spectrum, although we didn't call them folks on the autism spectrum,
right? Or
having seizure disorders. And, so my dad said, "You're good at this. You do this, you're really good at working with these folks." And then I had a cousin who was a speech pathologist. And she said, "You'd be good at this." And so I jotted off to the University of Wisconsin, and, you ticked a little box of declare your major. And I declared my major as a speech language pathologist and didn't look back. And I knew very early on that I didn't want to work in like a regular elementary school, and I didn't want to work in a hospital, that I looked for a career. My very first job And it was my grandmother who helped me find this job in a program for folks with significant disabilities.
Wow.
Because my grandmother was a donor to a private school in Iowa that included a residential component and a school component for folks with significant disabilities. So
wow.
she was like, go work there. I said, okay, I'll apply. And I did. And off I went. And I just feel like I've been guided very early on to this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then in my origin story, one could always have their doubts of like, well, maybe I was just a naive person. I got pushed into something I didn't really want to do. But I would also credit my university supervisor, which was a woman by the name of Joan Sasala. And I still share Christmas cards with her.
Oh.
And Joan said to me as I was doing my student teaching, she said things to the effect of, you just have the most natural, intuitive skills for working with kids with significant disabilities. She said, they don't throw you for a loop. I said, nope, they don't throw me for a loop. You know, I have some people that I've worked with that are like, it just breaks my heart so much. I can't do that. It's like, yeah, you gotta be tougher than that, sweetheart. You know? And she's like, you're just good at this. And then my first year out in the field, and you know, this is when the reality really hits you. And you're at a school and you got a caseload that's massive because I went to that school my grandmother went to, told me to go to. And I had a caseload of about 40 kids with severe disabilities, the majority who could not speak. And it's like, whoa, what do I do? And that's when I met Sheila Stewart. She was up at Sioux Falls at a school up in Sioux Falls, and I met Faith Carlson. Now, those are people who have some history in our field. And they were my first mentors who said, you know what you're doing. You know, they came to help me. We talked to each other. This was, you know, before email or text messaging. I had to drive to Sioux Falls or I had to drive to Omaha, Nebraska. And both of those women just instilled in me that inspiration, but as well that confidence that this is what you were made to do. And I haven't looked back.
That's amazing. Something I love about that your story is, I mean, for one, that you realized I am good at this. This is something I enjoy doing before you even realized, right? In high school, you were working with people, but that people, even before your mentors, your dad and your grandmother were mentoring you and cheering you on. They were in your court saying, this is something you're really good at. And I don't know that we all have that person who's done that. And so that just makes me think, you know, if as people in the field now, if we see that, we need to nurture that in others.
Absolutely. I could have seen myself, because I can argue fairly well. I could have been a lawyer probably. There's probably a number of other things I could have done. And the only thing that I was nervous about, because my mother also suggested you could be an elementary school teacher. But what scared me off from being an elementary school teacher was the idea of making bulletin boards. Isn't that silly? Because now today, if you think about how many manual communication boards and how much stuff I've made, you know, but it's just like, ooh, I don't want to make bulletin boards. This was the thinking of a 17-year-old, you know?
Well,
so
I'm sure that
my share of stuff now.
Yeah.
But I bet you've used your argumentative side to be an advocate, right? I think maybe all lawyers are advocates in some way or another anyways, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we want to know some guiding principles that have endured the field, that regardless of the advances in technology. And I hope that you include some of your work in South Africa as well.
Oh, I'm sure I will. Well, first off, I would start off by saying that I think one of the enduring things that has helped me for the 40 plus years that I've been working with people with disabilities is you have to trust your training. I got good training at the University of Wisconsin. Even before ASHA recognized that speech pathologists did AAC, before there was any required coursework, I was getting good training. But as well as you are trained, I don't think you can divorce your training from also having good intuition, as well as learning how to observe and really hone your observation skills and perfect your ability to ask some good questions. You know, in the early days when people would ask me, well, how do you do an AAC assessment? And I would say, well, let me show you my form. And at the time, the sassy answer was, I pulled out a yellow legal pad. This is what I have.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to go in and watch.
Yeah.
I'm going to go in and ask questions. And a saying that I've heard in my head many times is, and I had to write this down so I wouldn't mess it up today. It's a quote from Albert Einstein. And it is, your intuitive mind is a sacred gift. Don't forget to use it. So, you know, I would encourage those out there, you know, to use your intuition. Trust your training, but use your intuition. Because there's never going, I mean, I love all our research. I hope people keep coming up with more and more answers to our questions. But I have to say, in my 40 plus years, I've depended on my intuition and my gut. What's my gut tell me I need to do with this kid? Everybody fits the mold.
That's so true. And sometimes we need to think about using our intuition so we don't get stuck doing something, right? Or I don't know what to do here, or I'm going to model communication so much that I'm not paying attention to the other person because I'm so worried about, you know, the process of doing something. But just step back and use your intuition. I love that advice.
And I think using your intuition, what you're saying is you let the human connection drive the interaction, right? Instead of the checklist that is non-existent for you.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm going to let this I'm not going to look for perfection here. I'm going to let this unfold. Right? I'm going to let this happen. I think observation skills are wildly overlooked. I think there's a lot of, and then you do this and then you do that, and no, at no part in the checklist is it, what did you observe? What do we still not know? What questions should we be asking ourselves, right? So I agree with all of that. And I think that it's hard to teach young clinicians that, because they're the type A that comes out of grad school is a perfectionist, and they want to be good at something right away. And how they're measuring success may be, you know, completing a task, but the success is really that at the end of the day, did I make a connection, right? Because that's what you're talking about. People are saying you're good at this because they're seeing you make connection.
Yeah. You know, and that's not my second thing on the list, but that is one of the things on my list. That's one of my last things on the list. And that is, you have to be able to make meaningful connections with that person. If you're not connecting with them, if you're not a good fit, then maybe you've got to find somebody else to work with this family or with this kid. But you have to be able to make those meaningful connections and really see them as a human. Because, you know, my second big conviction, or my second big overriding principle, was that if you're going to make it in the long haul, and I've made this in the long haul, you have to have convictions about what you believe about people with disabilities. And it's those convictions that builds perseverance. Perseverance when you know, when you have setbacks. Perseverance when you're not making progress, because our progress for so many of our folks is minuscule. And I've got folks that I've worked with. I can think of Joshua. I started with Joshua and he's 4. He's 24. I've been with him 20 years. You know, majority of folks that I've supported in my private practice, you're with them for 10, 15, 20 years. And if you're going to persevere through setbacks and illnesses on their part, you really have to have those convictions. So I always say to folks, make a list. Make a list of, what do you fundamentally believe about people with disabilities? Whether those are theological things, sociological things, you know, educational things. You know, had, on the very top of my list is going back to my experiences working with people with disabilities, my father's business. Everybody can make a contribution. They were made in the image of God. They have value, they have quality, and I need to respect that. And you have to really come to terms with what are your convictions that will keep you moving forward when you messed up. My convictions and when I messed up is like, I made a bad decision. I didn't do this right. Please forgive me. Can we move forward and try something else? To acknowledge that I'm not going to have all the answers, but I will stick with you until you fire me. Because I'm going to be there. We'll find the answer. Nobody has ever fired me, actually. So, but so you have to really know what your convictions are. What do you really believe about people with disabilities, and what are you willing to sacrifice for those beliefs?
I love that idea of actually writing them down too. I think that's a great practice, no matter where you are in your career. I want to go back and after this, I'm going to get out my paper and write that down.
Yeah.
I love that.
All right. Another thing on my list is use what you have. Use what you have. That, in my first experiences, when I walked into that first school, I've always said to people, I'm so old. I predate copy machines. I predate laminating machines. I had to hire an artist to use a mimeograph, to use paper, draw the pictures on mimeograph paper and take it to the mimeograph machine. And you don't even know what a mimeograph machine is, you Brenda.
That's how you make copies, right?
It's like an ancient form of copying. And all the stuff, it came off on a blue. It was always bluish. It came off on your hands. It got all over your clothes. So right away, you had to have contact paper. I didn't have anything. And you had to use what you have and use the resources you have. There were ladies at the church that I went to that they made me little cloth carrying bags to carry stuff in. The handyman at the school, the janitor guy is the guy who made me so many of my lap trays. It's like, well, we have to have a surface to put this board on. He doesn't have a lap tray. Well, I learned how to make lap trays. I learned how to cut PVC pipe. I learned how to cut plexiglass. I did also learn that when you're cutting plexiglass, always wear protective glasses. Because even though you can't see that stuff falling off, it's getting into your eyes, and you will have a run to the emergency room to have your eyes flushed out.
Oh, no. That's
you learn these lessons in life.
Yes.
And the first time I went to South Africa, I really witnessed that you have to use what resources you have. Because this was, again, in the late 70s or early 80s. And I came back to the US after having been in South Africa. And I said, if I stand up and do one workshop and I hear one person in this workshop saying, well, we can't do AAC because we don't have a budget. We don't have this. I'm like, let me tell you about South Africa. These schools didn't have paper. These schools had nothing. They didn't have paper, they didn't have pencils, and they were doing AAC. They taught me how they were providing for their kids. They made seating positionings out of cardboard and paper mache. So a little cardboard, a little paper, a little water, and a little flour. We made a seating thing. Wow. We didn't have straps to keep them in there. Out of garbage or plastic grocery bags. We'll tear them up, we'll cut them up, we'll weave them. And you can make the most amazing strapping. You can make amazing swings to put kids in. That stuff is strong.
Wow.
You just saw that they used what they had in their environment. They used their creativity, their ingenuity. They didn't make excuses that we can't do something because we're too poor and we don't have anything.
Right.
So that's another one of my things. You just got to use what you have.
Well, and I think it unlocks the creativity, right, in you, and then you're invested in making something work because you made it, right? And now it's like, oh, can I have that handout? Can I print with your work? And that's fine. And that's great to share resources. But when you've had to create something from scratch, when you've had to put the work, the blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak, into it, you're invested in making that work, and you've unlocked some creativity there that I think is required for AAC. I think being creative is just another thing that all language therapists need to have, is because language is so, I joke that I have my undergrad in bachelor's of science and my master's in arts. And it's the same field, because I think we disagree on whether or not this is an art or a science, right? But when you're talking about this kind of level of creativity, that's definitely an art, right?
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I think another part about your story, Gail, that kind of stands out is that you're also going to the people, you're looking for the people who are the helpers, right? You said like the janitor could help with this, or maybe a parent or somebody. And so finding those people who can help you, and because people want to help, I think people enjoy being part of this journey, right?
Absolutely. And whether you're in a school, you're in an adult facility, I've supported a lot of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities in day programs and residential programs. The janitor, the handyman, he is my best friend.
Mm-hmm.
I train him all the time to keep an eye on the battery chargers, to keep an eye on those mounting systems. He's got the tools to fix stuff. He kind of knows how to fix stuff. They're my best friends. I could not do AAC in those facilities where I'm not there every single day,
Right.
without the janitor or the handyman.
That's true.
They're my buddies.
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of how I feel with paraeducators in classrooms. They're the ones who are there every day, all day. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, then another thing on my list, I think I would always say that in the field of AAC, one of my guiding principles, when the bottom line comes down to why is this system working? Why is this system not working? One of my fundamental principles is it's usually, if not always, about the words. What's programmed in this device? It's almost always about the words. And I mean, again, I go back to my history. In my training at the University of Wisconsin, in my early years, we always made our manual communication boards, which were filled with robust, frequently used words. We weren't calling them core vocabulary.
Right.
I predate that terminology.
Yeah.
But I look at photographs of the AAC users that I was supporting. They always had these robust manual communication boards that had core vocabulary on them. And somewhere along the line, and it was mid 80s, generally, I would probably say, we started, I think, providing systems to more and more AAC users with more significant disabilities. Kids started going into school programs where we started hearing things like, I need him to be able to say this in my class. And we started shifting over to, well, let's make sure we have those activity-specific words. Let's make sure we have this activities, engineered in our environment. And I saw a time where I got deeply concerned that we were engineering environments. So we were putting communication displays around a classroom, around a day program with the words we needed in each of these different activities. And we were not only losing our core vocabulary, but we were making the environment a communication display. And I was watching kids walk out of that school door with nothing. It's like, if an AAC system, to paraphrase, you've got mail. Remember when Tom Hanks and they're discussing with Meg Ryan, and she said, I didn't, when I put you out of business, it was nothing personal. And she said, well, it was personal to me.
Yeah. And
I think, well, if a communication board isn't personal to you, what is it? It should be personal. So when we've got kids in those late 80s, we're walking out of schools with a beautifully engineered classroom, but no manual communication. I thought, we've lost the perspective here that a board is supposed to be personal. They're supposed to walk out of school with it. And why weren't they walking out of school with it? Well, that little display of what we need at the reading circle and that display what we need at the art circle and what the display, they didn't apply at home. So we made systems that were unique for schools. And I'm glad to see by now at 2024, we're back into core. Now, we swaying a little too wide for a while in that we forgot about the extended vocabulary. So I hope that we're seeing some balance now.
Yeah.
That I would say if a system's being used or not used, if a kid values it or not values it, the fundamental problem you better take a look at are the words you've given them.
And I think what you're saying is what we see a lot in the device abandonment often happens because there's not enough vocabulary. And what I don't know why the tendency is to go, well, they're not really using it. So instead of 60, let's go to 4. Let's master 4 before we go to, and it's like, what? And like, that doesn't, none of that seems logical to me, but for some reason it's one of these data-based, data-driven, and I don't mean to speak negatively about data-driven, but I'm just saying it's one of these, like, it's common sense. First you master 4 and then you master 8 and then you master, it's like, oh my goodness. And what we're, and I'm always quoting, I can't remember the research and I should know it because I quote it, but it was like the 2 top reasons for device abandonment. One of them is not enough words. And the other is that the adults don't get it out. Right?
I'm completely with you on that, Brenda. I would rather err on the side of giving a kid more than they need or too much than err on the side of not giving them enough.
One of your guiding principles is, I believe that you are in there. I believe you have a lot to say. I believe that you can, I believe in your potential to learn all of these words. And when you have those belief systems guiding your decisions, going down to a 4 button is against everything you believe in.
You know, and you know, like my last probably principle would be, you're always fundamentally there to make sure that kid has got a quality of life that lets them make those connections, that they can really show the world who they are. And I mean, I've had a recent experience where I work with a little boy. I've been with him since he was 2. He's now 9. And of course, he's tiny. He's just tiny. He's physically tiny. He's got so many physical challenges. I think in the first 2, I met him when he was little past 2. I think he had like 7 or 8 different surgeries on almost every major organ because of substance abuses his mother had made. He had a lot of issues. And, you know, it took us years to decide on what kind of AAC system would he have, because he was only 2 with kind of an emotional and chronologically 2, but emotionally probably 9 months, or, you know, he just was so challenging to me. And of course, the family is thinking, I've hired Gail Van Tatenhove. She's going to fix something here, you know? And it took about 5 years before I said, well, first off, what I believe he's going to be going towards, if I put that on the front of his little stroller right now, the whole stroller is going to tip over.
Right.
I mean, I remember back in, you know, the early 80s, there was a device called an autocom. You know, a device is heavy when it arrives at your school in a wooden shipping crate. Okay. And the handyman's got to roll it in on a dolly. And so when we put the girl in her wheelchair and we put this thing on the front of her device and attached it on her armrest, the whole chair tipped forward.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
We had to hang sandbags on the back of her chair.
Wow.
Okay.
Counterbalance.
Because like my days of hanging sandbags on a kid's chair hopefully are over.
Yes.
But we put this big thing in front of him. We had to weight down his little stroller, and then we tried to find him. It was like, where is he behind all this? He's so tiny. He can't see the world around him. We said, no, you know, we're going to lay some foundational skills. We'll go with light tech. low tech. We're going to go with partner assisted scanning stuff. We had a lot of building of stuff. But now he's got a system in front of him. He is using a MinSpeak system. He's using a very customized version of Unity 40, because PRC does not make Unity 40. I can make a MinSpeak system in my sleep. So his is totally from scratch. He's an eye gazer. And, he doesn't always have it in front of him because it kind of obstructs his view of the world, because where it needs to be for eye gaze, and he likes to see other things. But he's gone through, in their family, they've gone through a very traumatic event. And he lives with his grandparents, and grandpa and grandma have been crying a lot and very upset. And, I wasn't ever confident that of everything that he knew in his vocabulary, because he doesn't always show anybody too much. It's hard for him to do it. But Nani and Poppy that's grandpa and grandma, were off at getting ready for a memorial service that was going to be going on. And he was just waiting for me to come to the house, because I was swinging by there before I went to the memorial service. And he's like, get my device in front of me, get my device in front of me, which is rare for him. And he brought up Nani, Poppy, sad. I said, are you telling me Nani and Poppy have been sad? Yes. Nani and Poppy have been very sad. Now, can you tell me, do you know why Nani and Poppy are sad? And he said, Mom, same. Susie, Joshua. Now, to tell you the backstory, his mom passed away. Mom, same. And who's Susie? Susie's their dog that recently passed. Joshua is an uncle that passed away. So he's fundamentally given me all of this. Nani, Poppy, sad. Why are they sad? Same, Mom, same as Susie and Joshua. How much more personal does an AAC system get?
Oh, yeah.
This is a little boy who they weren't quite sure they wanted to talk to him about what has happened. And they hadn't, but he knew what was going on. He did not miss any of this. And he was waiting for somebody to talk to him about this.
Yeah.
And I see him on Saturdays, about the next couple Saturdays, he always wants to talk about this. And this goes back to my convictions that he is more like me than like anyone else. Some of the clients that I worked with went on my journey, a 4-year journey where every month I left Florida and flew home to Wisconsin to help take care of my parents. And every time when I came back, they'd say stuff to me like, you look tired, Miss Gail, go home and sleep. I'm like, I think I should, or like one of the young men, his father passed away. And he said, one day he said to me, you have your Kleenex? Because he knows I'm a big crier. I said, yeah, I got a Kleenex. I always got a Kleenex. He said, my dad with your dad. I'm like,
that's getting me.
So this is some of those things that kind of carry me always through, that I want every AAC user to have those kind of human connections, to be able to talk about things that make them happy, to be able to talk about the things that break their hearts, and to trust me as the person who helped them get words. I'm going to get off for a period. When you give somebody words, you give them life. And it's just the most beautiful thing.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we're all needing a minute here.
We need a minute.
And one of the things that you said in the beginning was that it took maybe 5 years to figure out what the AAC system was going to be. And this is you. This is Gail Van Tatenhove. And I think, you didn't come in and just say, bibbidi bobbidi, I know exactly what it is. And but also that didn't mean that you weren't providing language to the student for the 5 years.
I had a vision where I wanted him to go. I mean, I believe from the very get-go that this kid, in spite of all of his physical challenges, he's a bright kid. And you could just see that glint. I always said that if I could invent something called a glintometer, where you put it up by a kid's eyes and it would measure, we've always said there's that glint. People could be talking and tell a joke and he got it. I'm like, he looks like he's not even with it. He's got that joke. And I just saw a vision, but the reality is he was tiny. He was immature. I don't believe in prerequisite skills, but there were some bits in place that needed to be in place because his funding was going to be through a funding source that was only going to buy something every 5 years. So I thought if I recommend something when he's 3, they're not even going to look at us buying something else till he's 8. Well, between the stuff I can rig together, I've had lots of people pass away. I inherit all their technology. I had 2 accents sitting in a closet at my house. I said, I can recycle one of those. It's not the newest one, but I have step-by-steps. I have all sorts of low tech. I have tons of stuff. We're going to get a system in front of him so that, we can see where we're going with this.
Yeah.
And but you have that vision. You have that vision of where would I like to see him when he's finally ready for a really robust AAC system.
Yeah. And a lot of observation in between.
Yeah. And the best thing I think that ever happened to this kid was COVID, because he was over therapized. Here's another thought. He had so much therapy. I thought, when does this kid have a chance to be a kid?
Oh,
I had to struggle to find a time in his day's schedule when he was at home to see him. It's like, well, he's got these 2 other speech therapists coming over who were working on speech development. This is a kid who can't even stand having his lips touched, and they were having him try to blow ping pong balls across his lap tray as a means to develop his speech. That kind of sends shivers up your spine, doesn't it? But he had so much, and too many OTs coming and PTs coming and vision specialists coming. Between each of these therapists, he had to go take a nap. He was exhausted. He's tiny. And it's like he just had to have a chance to grow up a little bit and be a kid. And what does he like to play with? And when they say, well, we really don't have time in his schedule to play, I'm like, well, this is something fundamentally wrong here. You know?
Well, and I hear in Arizona, kids are not going to school. They're going to ABA, 40 hours of ABA a week. And the ABA therapy places really don't allow for less than 40. And that's a lot of hours for a 3-year-old. And even 2.5, like as they're aging out of out of early intervention services, they qualify here. And it's like 40 hours a week. Again, when do you get in any other therapy but ABA? And it's 1 adult to 1 child. So when are they even getting experiences that are not adult?
It's like, what do you mean he doesn't play it? As we quote Carolyn Musselwhite, who once said, the occupation of childhood is to play.
Yes.
That's what they're supposed to be doing. So, they're like, well, he's so sensitive. He can't have anything on his face or his mouth. And like, I understand, but we're going to do pudding painting today. Well, let's get a tarp on us. Let's get our ponchos over us. And he just loves, for the first couple of years, he just wanted to touch things, to throw things, to bang things. It's like, all right, we're going to make a mess here.
We're not playing, we're not learning on the regular developmental scale, right?
You need to have something to talk about, right?
And I wore the communication board. I always said I'm a broad, so that I could get 5 to 6 symbols right across here, with enough room in between, because I'm a broad enough woman, and I can get a couple more down. So I would wear the symbols. We were working on his eye gaze, and we just try to do everything we could to say he needs to be engaging with the world and playing and having fun and, whacking things. And there's nothing better this kid likes is being in the kitchen with his grandpa and cooking. Now, he doesn't eat anything by mouth, but boy, he likes to watch people cook, and he loves to smell everything, and he doesn't want to taste anything, but he just wants to be engaged with others. Doesn't want to be
Well, I
left
think it
out.
goes back to your first principle, which is that trust your training. I think that's what happens when we introduce assistive technology in any way. Sometimes it's like everything I know about language went out the window, and it's like, no, you actually still know about language development. You still know what's needed, right, for kids to improve their language skills. They need to play, right? We know the play-based language is still relevant, even if
Yeah.
their bodies don't let them play in the same way,
Yeah.
right? And same goes with now, the ever coming back to what is age appropriate. It's like, yeah, when did we lose what we know to be true about all respectful language development and language therapy is always to be age respectful. Age respectful when they're a child, they should play. Age respectful when they're a little bit older, they should have opportunities. We shouldn't assume that the Bubbles and the Elmo is still the favorites. And maybe the Bubbles and the Elmos are, but maybe they are because nothing else has been introduced, right?
Yeah.
So it's just
Yeah.
like, don't forget what we know about human beings, about development and about language. The technology shouldn't change that.
Yeah. And I had to alert other people working with him, particularly his grandparents, that it might look like I'm kind of free flowing with him,
Yeah.
but I have a plan here because balancing
Yes.
the play and child driven, there's a trend in our field that I'm kind of worried about is that we're slipping away from explicit systematic instruction.
Mhm.
I mean, reading curriculum, systematic, specific, explicit instruction. Math has
Mhm.
specific, explicit, systematic instruction. And that I know what I want him to learn. I've got an order that I want him to learn these things. And I'm kind of concerned that we are seeing modeling as modeling is a great thing. I'm not in any way criticizing modeling, except if your modeling is not systematic, explicit instruction.
Yes,
exactly.
I think you're right, Gail, and that's an area that definitely needs to be focused on is now we know these principles and these instructional techniques. What does this look like? I've had the question come up from a special ed director saying, I'm seeing modeling and modeling and modeling, but where's the explicit instruction? What does that look like?
Yeah.
Well, and I was at a pre-conference at Closing the Gap just last month with Karen Kangas, and she was like, I think AAC should be a class in every high school and it should count for credit. Like, I don't think you ever graduate from explicit instruction in this language. Right. And it's like what we need to honor that instruction is not once a week, 30 minutes with an SLP and three other kids and you're around a circle. Like if it's a curriculum, then it's on the daily, or however your school does it. Right. And, that it really does need to be explicitly taught and in syntax does matter and pronouns do matter and all of that stuff instead of this they say they can say what they want to say, right? You get that. Well, they say everything they want to say. They say, and it's like, how would you know that? First of all, that's an assumption that's pretty dangerous, right? And it's like, well, because the only things they want to talk about is SpongeBob, popsicles, and going outside. So then they can say those three things. And it's like, that's the assumption that they can say that all the things they want to say. But we model other language, but they don't do it. It's like, yeah, there's so much more to AAC than modeling. And I agree with you, not saying we're not supposed to be modeling, but you're right. It's not explicit instruction.
Yeah. And when people think they're doing explicit instruction, but they're really doing something that my friend and colleague Amanda Soper has called pick your own adventure. And pick your own adventure. You're going to go online, whether you're at Teachers Pay Teachers or you're at a resources offered by one of our device manufacturers, and you buy this and you get this and you get this, and you just kind of sling those at the kids. It's like, well, today let's do this thing, and today let's do this thing. That's not a systematic, explicit instruction. In my example that I'm starting with this kid now that he's truly on a unity type program. If we transition to thinking about a unity type program, I know that I'm going to systematically and explicitly teach you the vocabulary in this approach. If I'm thinking about Unity 84, I know there are roughly 45 symbols that are the main ones. And you got your pronoun symbols, you got your parts of speech markers, but you got 45 of them. And I have my list. I have my list of how I'm going to work through those symbols. I know which symbols play nicely with each other because they have words that those symbols code that go nicely together. And I have my list of the verbs, the adverbs, the prepositions that are going to be taught in a clump, because I'm going to systematically teach you how to make a verb phrase. Because in my undergraduate work, I remember my language course that Dr. Vicki Lord Larson taught us and says, if you want kids to start talking in sentences, teach them verbs and verb phrases. It's the heart of the sentence. Right? And I can think of every AAC user that I was always writing down what they were saying, and I got my green marker and I would nag them. If you haven't given me a verb, if I've written everything you said to me in one color, let's say orange for nouns. Oh, sweetheart, you gave me a list. It's not a sentence. I would nag them. If it doesn't have a green word, it's not a sentence. So they would always give me the green word first. Didn't matter what they were saying. Gave me a green word, a verb first. And so I know what I'm going to work on. I'm going to work on the development of the verb phrase. I'm going to work on the development of the noun phrase. I'm going to teach my pronoun preverb phrases. There's a plan where the one thing you teach builds you up to the next thing. The next thing you teach builds you to the next thing. You're not just saying, well, I'm going to go to Teachers Pay Teachers and get this cute little thing and play this game. I sell stuff at Teachers Pay Teachers. Yeah, if you buy the Candyland thing at Teachers Pay Teachers, terrific. That's a supplement to your systematic teaching. That is not a systematic, explicit teaching curriculum. It's an activity you do in your plan.
Yes. Yeah. So Gail, when you came to Seattle once and I got to listen to you talk about adding the colors of the rainbow, and you had out, the different color markers and you're writing them on your whiteboard. And there you're probably pulling it out.
There they are. They're always at my desk. My whiteboard's over here.
Right. So corresponding to the different types, how we color code words and systems. I know that people listening to the podcast love resources because they're like, I'm so on board with what she's saying, but what do I do then? If I'm one of those people who's kind of been choosing my own adventure, what resources do you have for people to learn about systematic instruction for AAC?
Well, that's a good question, but not necessarily an easy question to answer.
Yeah.
Because I have authored systematic instruction stuff, but and it's always been for folks who use MnSpeak based programs. But as you know, MnSpeak based programs evolve over time, and some of the symbols have changed and some of the things have changed. And I haven't been able to stay up to speed on getting things updated to keep up with all of those changes.
Sure. You're busy.
I'm busy. Well, actually, I'm trying to retire. I'm 70 years old. I'm trying to retire.
I feel like the language lab in PRC has a system there.
Yes, I will agree that I think they have a system for being able to take a look at moving through Brown's stages.
Yeah.
Right. But within that structure, I will be a little, you should always be able to critique the people in your family harsher than you critique anybody else. And I am part of the We Love MnSpeak, PRC, Saltillo, MnSpeak Academy family.
Yes.
I would also contend that within that structure, you still sort of, I'll pick this thing to use today. I'll pick this thing to use today. And that one material doesn't automatically get you ready to make the next one. But I would say they come the closest of any place that I would say that the AAC Language Lab, with the materials they have that coordinates with the stages, I think we can all do better. I think we could all do better. I used to put out something called Unity Icon Adventures. which kind of systematically walked you along an approach to teaching, particularly the MnSpeak families of ideas systematically. And
yes,
again, I did that when MnSpeak PRC was putting out a device called a Pathfinder. Well, how many generations ago was that?
Yeah.
I mean, there's another principle you can think. What's one thing that's an abiding principle? Whatever devices you see on your shelf today will be outdated 5 years from now.
Right.
True.
Accept it.
I remember the Liberator, the one that had like almost a receipt that would print out. Was that the Liberator?
Oh, that was the Liberator, but that was predated by the Light Talker, Touch Talker, Delta Talker.
Yeah.
I missed that printout. I kind of liked that printout. Yeah.
I just remember messing with changing the cartridge.
Yeah. And that, that what device got replaced? What did that get replaced with?
I think Pathfinder,
Pathfinder. And then Pathfinder got replaced by,
was it the
at the same time
Accent?
came out Vantage and Vanguard.
Oh, right.
Vantage, right.
Vantage and Vanguard came out. And then came Echo. Nope, you missed the Echo. And then the Accent. I always say this to the younger therapists that grew up on technology, that the device manufacturers need to hear from you. They need to hear about what you like, what you don't like. I'm very curious of how we're going to see artificial intelligence move into our AAC systems. I think I'll live long enough to see that. I don't know how I feel about it. That if you maybe, like if this young boy had said, Nani Poppy sad, same, mom, Joshua, what kind of sentence would that have taken?
Right.
How would artificial intelligence have tweaked that? Would it have been accurate? Would it have not been accurate? How do I feel? Will people say, oh, look at this great language this kid has? When, he's really kind of topic commenting, I don't know how I feel about it.
This is a tangent, but I saw at Closing the Gap, one of the systems, Seaboard, then they have an artificial intelligence predictor thing. So then they say it and then they give you an example sentence of what that might look like grammatically correct. It was interesting.
What will our AAC users have to say, yay or nay to that? Like, yes, that's what I meant, or no, that's not what I meant, or it's pretty close to what I meant. I'll take that because it sounds smarter than what I meant to say. Or
or is it something for the partner to comment on? I don't know. Yeah, it's a whole.
I think there's all sorts of ethical things you're going to have to grapple with on that. Who's producing that message?
Well, and maybe they need to kick out 4 choices. Maybe it needs to be these are the top 4 things you could have been referring to, and they're going to need to refer to that. And then, is that an accommodation? I mean, it's a can of worms.
It could be putting us in the same conundrum that we had when we were dealing with facilitated communication.
Yes.
Who or what is actually authoring that message?
Possible. We are approaching the end of our time, and we probably could continue for a much longer time. I know we do want to make sure we ask you, because of your experience with MnSpeak, and Brenda and I have done consultations or had conversations with people who just feel like LAMP or Unity or the systems don't make sense to the way they think about language. And so either kind of get overwhelmed or think, well, I'm going to use something else instead, right? I'll use a different system for my student instead. How do you approach that?
Okay. Well, for me, the very first time I saw a MnSpeak system, I got it. I just got it. Because I think it went back to my early roots, where when I would have put a picture on a kid's board, let's say I put a picture of a car on the kid's board, I was not averse to writing 2 or 3 words above that picture. I would write car, drive or go, and maybe fast, because I wanted to get as many words on that board as possible. So I got it right away. But I do appreciate, for 20 years or 40 years, I've heard people say, I don't get it. It's so hard. And, my response to this is, particularly if they say, well, this is not, this is not how language works. And I think, do you know anything about language? Because this is exactly how language works. When I think about how to organize language, I pull out like a mind map or a concept web, and I say, okay, I'm going to put in the middle of this, that picture. Don't even think about this min-speak system. I'm going to put a picture on here, and I'm going to put a picture of that glass of juice, a glass of juice. Now start telling me what that makes you think about. And everybody can say, oh, you drink, it's a beverage.
Mm-hmm.
We fill that all in. I got my color markers. I'm writing drink in green and beverage or orange juice in an orange. And I said, this is what min-speak is. Now, when you go to your device, imagine, if you will, inside this device, there's that web that you just came up with all these ideas. Now I'm going to push that button, and I want you to get into your prayer position, and let's think about one of those words and hope that it just pops out. Of course, we do that. I said, it's not going to work that way. It doesn't work that way, but let's see how I wrote drink in green. Because it's like, well, how do I know which one of those ideas I want to say? You got to give it the second symbol. So we wrote this in green over here. It's a verb. We wrote beverage or orange juice. So I start walking them through to say, this is the most natural way that people think about how words go together. Every elementary school teacher is going to do this with your kid in school. They're going to work on when you see this, what do you think of? Who, where, when, how? This is how language works. It is not one picture only makes me think of one thing.
Right.
This is how, and people are like, oh, I've never thought about that way. And the part that people stumble over is, to me, is always the most obvious strength of a min-speak system. And then I kind of play the mathematician and say, how many words you want to give your kid? Want to give your kid 25 words? No. Want to give them 50 words? I'm looking at a screen of roughly 50 pictures. Well, let's say we want to give our kid 300 words. So on a screen of 50 pictures, and every picture just means one thing. How many pictures do you have to come up with for those 300 words? I need 300 pictures, right? All right. And then I got to divide those 300 pictures into only 50 per screen. And we got to have some special keys on the side. We got to do the math. How many screens are you going to need? Because the other thing that people get hung up about min-speak is like, oh, that symbol sequencing, it's so hard. Symbol sequencing, sweetheart, is no different than navigating. In a dynamic display, when you got to navigate to another screen, still got to navigate. You still have to go somewhere else. The roots of both of those skills. And in this one, I've often said, I love min-speak because I'm lazy. I don't want to teach 300 pictures. I want to teach 45 pictures. And I want to use that natural, multiple meaning things that each of those pictures are going to trigger. And if they don't trigger those multiple meanings, then that just means I'm going to come with my prop. Let's say my umbrella. And we did this with this little boy when he was learning that the umbrella is the preposition under. And you could, whether it was wet, and we just had this thing, and we had Poppy trying to squirt us with the squirt gun, and we were getting underneath the umbrella so we wouldn't get wet. And we're just going to give them the life experiences. Those things make sense to them. And when the day comes when there's a word that they don't know, this happens all the time with my older students. I'm working with a boy named Joshua. I'm learning all the more fancy vocabulary in the Unity program. So he knows, tell and say and talk. But this week we were working on discuss. And I can say to him, well, what's a word that sort of means the same as discuss? He says talk or say. Like, absolutely. So if we're going to say the word discuss, what symbol should that word start with? Because it belongs in the same family of that idea. He already knows the first symbol. He already knows the last symbol. It's a verb. He's just got to figure out what's still lit up on his board. What's the middle symbol?
Mm.
And so he is becoming a self-learner of his vocabulary. I don't actually have to teach him all the more advanced words because he's got in his mind, he sees now, because we've drawn them out on those word webs. They all go together as this unit, as this family. And it truly is the way the human mind is wired to connect words together. It just is.
I love that idea of having, in the beginning, just having the word and what does it make you think of? And just go from there.
Most natural thing, everybody can do it. But they're scared. They're scared of those words. It's not something they were used to.
Right. Use your intuition.
And they get hung up on the sequencing. And my kid couldn't put 3 steps together. It's like, if he's going to say more than what's ever on one screen, they're going to have to learn how to do 2 or 3 navigations. You just do.
Right. Thank you. But we are out of time. I can't believe how fast this has gone. Is there anything else that you want to share professionally or personally that we just need to hear about?
I'm trying to figure out when I officially do retire. People always say, well, Gail, are you retired? I said, I'm on the path to retirement. So instead of 80 hours a week, I've tried to cut back to about 50 hours a week.
Oh my goodness.
I'm getting there. And I think I don't know what I'm going to do when I'm not doing this.
And maybe that's okay.
Maybe that's okay. I always said that when I officially retired, I was going to be the personal chef for the adults with disabilities that I worked with who lived in their own homes. Because I saw their diets and their eating as abysmal. You know, a Lunchable is not a nutritious good choice. And so when I would go see them, I would bring them, something I'd made that week. So I always said, when I'm officially retired, I'm going to cook on Monday, deliver the food to you on Tuesday for you have good food for the week.
I love that.
But I'm not going to do that because none of those guys are with us anymore. So I got to find somebody else. I'm going to cook for somebody.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll find lots of volunteers to be on the other end of that, the receiving end. Thank you so much for joining us. This has just been a really fun conversation. Yeah, thought-provoking. It's great for us and for our listeners to hear your experiences and learn from what you've learned.
For your contribution to the field all these decades. I mean, where would we be without people who didn't just commit to this, right? Long term.
Thank you for those kind words. I enjoyed this time chatting with you, and I would say that I'm optimistic about our field. You 2 young women are doing great work, and I'm having an opportunity to work with a couple other people where we're working on a project together because, they wanted to work on some things. I said, I'm too tired. I'm ready to not work on these things, but I'll advise you and I'll hand the baton off to you. So I'm very optimistic that we have the next generation coming along is going to do us proud in this field. So thank you for work you're doing.
The contents of this podcast were developed under contract with the Washington Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, U.S. Department of Education, and administered by Central Washington University. However, those contents did not necessarily represent the policy of the OSPI and CWU, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal and state government.